Hi everyone, my name is Caio Ramalho and today I want to show you a game I've been working on called Tyrant's Twilight, a mix between tactics RPG and straight up action gameplay. Level design has to be one of the most intimidating aspects of making a game. You can have all the coolest systems and mechanics, but if your levels don't make good use of them, players might never notice. Good mechanics expand the possibility space, but good levels actualize that space. My game has a ton of mechanics, but barely any levels, so it's time to start fixing that. The first thing I did was try to find some practical guides to level design. I think the ones I liked the most were these videos by Steve Lee, who worked on Dishonored 2. Now, I've never played a Dishonored game, but even I know they are famous for their excellent level design. So I think this is a really valuable resource just sitting here on YouTube for free, and you should definitely check it out if you're interested in the subject. The first step to creating a good level, according to Steve, is to put it in writing. That was a bit surprising to me, but in retrospect it makes a lot of sense. It's a tried and true method of organizing your thoughts, so I decided to follow Steve's method step by step. The level I'm building in this video is the game's tutorial. We start by listing our goals for the level. In my case, I want to teach players how to move and attack, teach them that there's resources they can collect on the level. At the end of the level, I want to introduce a second playable unit and teach players how to handle multiple playable characters. And one last important thing, I want to make the level interesting for returning players. I envision something like a level that takes about 10 minutes to get through the first time, but I want expert players to be able to beat it in at most half of that time. Next up, we have to list the elements we can play around with to achieve our goals. It's basically just a reminder of all of the mechanics available for this level for us to mix and match. This is the tutorial, so our goal is to teach how movement and attack works. Turns are defined using a similar system to Final Fantasy's active time battle, and attacking is inspired by Paper Mario's action commands. We'll need to introduce the player to basic features like a couple kinds of different enemies, and resource collecting, and NPC allies. Last video I talked about dodge rolling out of the way of incoming attacks as a way to recover stamina and counterattack. This is an example of an element that will help make this level more interesting for returning players, as it speeds up the wait time between moves. Another thing I wanted to implement for this devlog is the equivalent of stylish moves from Paper Mario: The Thousand-Year Door. If you don't know, in that game, these stylish moves are secret actions the player can perform when attacking to gain more star power. In Tyrant's Twilight, I'm thinking they can give the player a boost to stamina recovery. The idea is that the character is playing with their enemy and gets a confidence boost that lets them act more quickly. I hope these will help elevate the skill ceiling of the action part of the game by requiring players to pull off more demanding button inputs. Elements like dodge rolling and stylish moves help the player regain stamina faster and will be crucial to build a level returning players can speedrun through. After the elements are listed, we need to fill out the gameplay beats. These are basically the cool moments you want the player to experience on your level. For me, I want players to build a relationship with the ally unit. Essentially, whether this NPC lives or dies is going to be up to the player's actions. If you just let him go ahead to draw the enemy's attacks, he won't make it to the end of the level. There's thematic significance to it being this way for the story, so that's a very important point for me. Another beat is the player getting the feeling that the real battle is somewhere else. That's also thematically relevant because at the beginning of the game, our protagonist is trying to escape a lost battle. And finally, I want returning players to feel like they can just tear through the level in a few minutes. I want to evoke that feeling of speedrunning, of trying to pull off a sequence of complicated maneuvers, but in the context of this tactics RPG action hybrid. The next section of our level design sheet is called questions, but these usually come up as we start filling the section after that, which is the sequence. As the name implies, this is where we list the sequence of actions the player is expected to go through. These steps include the gameplay beats, but go into much more detail and cover the beats in between the ones outlined as the more important ones. The basic sequence for my level goes something like: teach how to move, teach how to attack using the archer, show the level objective, which is just reaching the goal for now, let players choose between two different paths, introduce a second unit, which is the swordsman, teach how to attack using the swordsman, and finally kill all the enemies to end the level. This seems like a decent first level for me, and enough to squeeze a quick 10 minutes of gameplay out of. Now, I feel like this linear sequencing has limitations in regards to things like branching paths. It's not too bad for a short branch like the one I have on this level, but it seems like this might be something I'll have to adapt for my game when more units are introduced and players will have to manage multiple paths at the same time. Then again, Dishonored levels are described as radically non-linear, so maybe I'm getting ahead of myself. Maybe this will be a non-issue, we'll see how it goes for later levels. For now, this approach will do just fine for a level where the player only controls a single unit for most of it. Some questions that came up during this sequencing process were how to introduce ranged units in a way that feels intuitive. Is 10 minutes too long for a new player to be stuck using a single unit? And how many enemies can I put at the end to showcase the value of having two units without overwhelming new players? These last two in particular, I feel like I won't know the answer to until I start doing some playtesting, but I'll talk more about that in a bit. As for the ranged units, I decided to be a little mean and knock two birds with one stone. I placed this health pickup right after the player's first encounter with enemies. I expect they'll go grab it, only to be hit by the ranged enemy from a distance. With that, I've taught players that there are things you can pick up around the level, and some enemies can hit you from far away. If the player notices the enemy looks different, they can hover the cursor over to see their attack range and be prepared. So it's not like it's impossible to know about it on your first playthrough either. I also placed these two units above a cliff right at the beginning, so players can see a monster with ranged attacks exists. So the design sheet for the tutorial was done, and I've been following this method for all future levels. But for the purposes of this devlog, I wanted to have something playable to show you. You've been seeing footage of what the level ended up looking like, but at this point in the design process, I had very little to show other than the Google document. So with that, I started to draw the level on paper. The objective here was to meticulously determine what an optimal playthrough would look like for expert players, sharding out every move and attack while collecting the most resources and leveraging enemies as a way to propel the player to the end of the level in the shortest amount of time possible. I used this method to help guide the level geometry, which was a bit time-consuming but kind of fun. I even put it all on a spreadsheet and calculated an estimate of how long it would take to finish the level if executed perfectly. This is really interesting to me, seeing such an action-oriented gameplay focus on this game that started first and foremost as a strategy game. With all this preparation out of the way, it was time to start blocking the level in Unity. Another lesson I took from our friend Steve Lee was the skateboard approach. Basically, it consists of having something playable every step of the way, instead of going for full polish of each part of the level as you build it. Level design is, like game dev itself, a very iterative process. You need to fact-check your assumptions, and having something unpolished but playable will always be preferable to wasting a long time polishing a bad idea and then having to throw all that work away. My objective for the game going forward is to have the entire thing playable even if in a very rough state, especially in terms of visuals. I can't say anything definitive yet, but none of the art style and animations you are seeing right now will be around for very long. It's all very amateurish looking because it was made by me, and it's about time it gets replaced with some proper art by some proper artists. This frees me up to focus on getting all the systems and levels playable, which is what I should have done from the beginning, but the skateboard method has helped remind me of this. Because I suffer from a bad case of scope creep, I couldn't resist implementing one new feature for this level, which were environmental traps. So this boulder up here can be shot by a savvy player to make the harder path a bit easier. This is something I want to introduce properly in the next level, which would make this instance of it another secret for returning players. And with that, the level is done. The next step is, like I mentioned earlier, playtesting. but I want to have a few more levels to offer before putting it up for you guys to play. So for now, all I ask is that you either subscribe or wishlist the game if you haven't already. I mean, why not do both while you're at it? If you're a fan of the other content on the channel, I'm sorry I missed my deadline for the Metroid Prime commentary. That will probably be done by early July, so stay tuned for that. Thanks for watching, and I'll talk to you all later. Bye.